positive psychology is not a spectator sport. It's to be lived. Take a breath, look at those potential pathways, align them against your values and your strengths, and then feel like you're making the best possible decisions moving forward.
I heard the Dalai Lama say this once. He said, when you try mindfulness, where does your mind wander? He goes, to Burger King.
What's the most important time? And that time is now, because that's all we really have, is this moment to the next moment.
Dr Suzy Green, welcome to Don't Let the Old Man In. So good to see you.
It's so good to see you too, Pod. This is such a wonderful podcast focus that you have, and I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's a treat for me because this is going to sound terrible when I say this a lot. I've known you, I think it's 25 years now, and you were the first person to ever open my eyes to the notion of positive psychology, and it was just emerging back then.
That's right.
I was one of the early students at the University of Sydney, master's degree, and I think you were newly graduated from your PhD when you were launching the positive psychology, and here we are all these years later.
Exactly, and it was very different in those days because, as you said, positive psychology was just emerging. I used to be able to quote every single study at that point in time, and then at some point I had to really reluctantly just let go and realise that I couldn't be across. And even now I get updated research abstracts every week, and there's at least 30 to 40. It's impossible to stay across it all, but I do my best.
Well, you do a great job.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with an obvious question. For folks who don't know you or don't know this podcast, what are they going to get from our conversation today?
Well, I hope that it's basically going to whet their appetite, because you can do a 2-year master's in positive psychology. So I just want to put that out there at the beginning. But I'm hoping to bring some gems from my own learnings, my own understanding of the science. But I am someone that has done her best, not perfectly, I would say, as we reflect over time, but, to live it. And Chris Peterson, who was one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, he was renowned for saying that positive psychology is not a spectator sport. It's to be lived. Yeah. And so I really am a pracademic. I love the science. I have 2 honorary academic positions, but most of my focus has been about how do we actually bring this to life for people and make it meaningful to their lives.
Fantastic. So I'm going to bring you right back to 1998, a guy that I know you will know and I know of, Marty Seligman, who at the time, I think he was the president of the American Psychological Association.
Yes.
And he said something that at the time was quite revolutionary. In hindsight, it seems so obvious. But at the time, he said, psychologists spend all of our time looking at what's wrong with people.
That's right.
How do we actually look at what's right with people, and how do we help people just do more of that?
Exactly.
And for a man who's not renowned for being jovial or happy, he'd sort of be called the happy professor.
Exactly.
You were one of the first people in my life who took that on board and ran with it. So what was it about his challenge or his question that you grabbed and then decided to spend the rest of your life spending time with?
Exactly. Well, like Marty, I was a clinical psychologist, or at that time in 1998, I was doing my honours year in psychology, but the intention was to move into clinical psychology, which I did, and I was completing a clinical master's. But alongside that, I had an interest in self-help, self-development. My partner at the time was studying psychiatry, and also he had a very strong interest in Eastern philosophy and had visited India a couple of times. Now, at that point in time, that was all like out there for me, because I was a young woman that was brought up with the encouragement to get married and have children, and that was a happy life. And I think it can very well be a happy life, but my life didn't go according to that. That's what I desired, but I guess I grew when I went through my university studies. I grew, and it had an impact on my relationship with my partner at the time, and it set me on this incredible journey that was nothing that I had thought I was going to do with my life. But I guess coming back to that question, I already had an intrinsic interest about, being the best that we could be through self-help books, not just from, I guess, a therapeutic approach, but really I was very interested early on in visualization, Shakti Gawan's work. I was really bordering on a lot of the New Age materials. And when I started to read more about Marty's topics of focus for positive psychology, I thought, wow, I've always been of the belief that just because we don't have the science doesn't mean we won't get the science. Yeah. And in fact, that's what we're seeing now. A lot of topics that were identified as a new age are now getting science behind them. Not all of them, so my immediate thought was, wow, we can use science to actually help people live their best lives. So that's really what really interested me. And also because I was working in a psychiatric office and it was very much symptom identification, symptom reduction. And I started to understand that helping people live their best lives was looking at their whole life, and often the symptoms were a reaction to the lives that they were living. Not always, because there's such a thing as endogenous depression, for example, which is hard to define and hard to understand. But I just thought there's so much opportunity here for people to go beyond treatment. And my job as a clinical psych pod was to help people move to normal on the depression, anxiety and stress scale. And then
to go from wrong to normal.
Yeah. And then it was like, bye-bye, my job's over. Whereas positive psychology, as Marty first articulated, is about moving beyond that, taking people from 0 to +5. And even though I worked clinically for many years, as I moved into positive psychology and then coaching, there was like an intrinsic, innate alignment for me that this is the best place and the best use of my strengths. Yes, I could continue to work with people one-on-one for treatment, and I did years of that, to be honest, which I'm so grateful for that I've had that experience. But I really feel that the best use of my strengths has been in the work that I'm doing, which is teaching people about living their best lives and learning about how to proactively boost their mental health and well-being.
Brilliant. You said a few things there I want to touch on. You talked about how the science is kind of catching up to the life.
Yes.
And my memory of your subject from when I had hair and we were both younger.
Exactly.
And one thing you got all of us in your class to do, which I loved, was experiments. You got us to experiment with different things. And yes. I know we'll touch on some of that later in terms of practices like hope and gratefulness and different things like that. But it was such a contrast in the master's degree where everything was all talked about evidence-based. You have to have the research done before you do anything. You would say, hey, let's experiment with this and see what you think. And I really appreciated that for a start, because I've always felt that science often has to catch up, particularly academic science, to what's happening in the real
That's
world.
Right.
And positive psychology has certainly done that and more. But for people who are listening who have never heard the word positive psychology, and maybe have heard the whole notion of, hey, how to be happy, and think we're talking about that and only that.
Exactly.
Because we're not.
No, we're not.
Can you just give us maybe a quick overview of what does positive psychology talk about, and how has it evolved in the last number of years?
Yeah, well, firstly, it's an umbrella term, which means there are many areas of study that fall under that umbrella, like, as you mentioned, gratefulness, mindfulness, compassion, positive leadership. So there's a broad range of topics. Some areas have a lot more research than others, and gratitude is probably the one that has the most amount of research at this point in time. More often than not, it's defined as the science of well-being. Now, there's still debate 26 years on about what well-being is, and I'm happy to unpack that a little bit more today. But I really like one of the early definitions by Shelley Gable and Jonathan Haidt, which is it's the study of the processes and conditions of optimal human functioning. So for me, it's about, again, very simply, the study of being our best selves. So, there's so much in there. As I said, you can do a 2-year master's, but there's a lot that we can benefit from.
And is that just psychologically our best selves, or does that include like physically and functionally and relationship-wise?
Well, interestingly enough, there was a very strong focus on psychological well-being, but in recent years there's been a recognition that clearly physical health plays an important role with our psychological health. And there's much more discussion around the interaction between physical and mental health now. So, and look, there's also wonderful research on the benefits of the cultivation of positive emotions on our immune functioning. So we're starting to see with the evolution the interaction between physical and psychological well-being.
So the science is catching up with what our ancestors instinctively knew or understood.
Absolutely. That, the wisdom traditions had so much wisdom, and I think we need to really continue to go back and learn from that.
There's a framework that I presume you taught me originally, and it might have come out of Marty Seligman's work. I'm not quite, I can't remember, the PERMA framework.
Yes.
I think it's a really good place to start for someone who's trying to get a hold of what are you and I talking about. PERMA meaning positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement.
Yes.
What strikes me about it is the last word, achievement.
Yes.
And the notion of what do I want to achieve and what's the satisfaction I get from doing work that I enjoy, that I'm able to achieve something with, and all of that notion.
Yes.
And one thing I notice, certainly myself and certainly a lot of the guests on this show have commented on, as we kind of hit 40, 45, 50, certainly beyond that.
Yes.
The attraction for focusing on achievement just drops away into other things. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because when I first read Marty's book Flourish, where he articulated the PERMA model, he was really light on achievement. Mm-hmm. And as you and I know from a coaching perspective, we know a lot about achievement. That's where our focus has been. And particularly early on in coaching, when coaching was very achievement oriented. So I gave a lot of thought to that at the time. And I thought, well, what research? Because he didn't at the time really articulate his foundation for coming up with that model. He did to a degree, but within psychology more broadly, there has been a lot of research on need for achievement. Self-determination theory talks a lot about our need for competence. So I think there's a lot I could say here, but from a self-determination perspective, we know that we need to feel competent at something. And there's decades of research on this cross-culturally, not necessarily be good at everything, but we need to have these feelings of I'm doing things, I'm competent at things. It's good for it is good for our well-being. We know it's good for our well-being. But as you said, as we get older, and particularly when we have achieved a lot in our lives, often, and I know I'm right in the thick of this at the moment as I'm transitioning through my developmental stages, I don't have the need to prove myself anymore. I spent most of my life, particularly I'm someone that left school when I was 16, which a lot of people don't know. And I wouldn't even talk about that because I was concerned about the judgments or the effect it was going to have on my career. But I really don't care now. I think that's that care factor when you get older too. And so I don't have anything to prove. And we also know from the developmental literature that is often common in developmental shifts and that we become more meaning and purpose-driven. And even coming back to the work by Carl Jung, who spoke a lot about the first 40 years of a man, he said, I think at the time, of a person's life, that there is a strong need for establishing ourselves. And often if we have families, we have to provide for families, so there's a strong need for achievement. But around that sort of, and historically it was 40. I'm actually seeing it happening earlier with a lot of young people now, which is interesting. But there is a bit of a crisis, and then it becomes more meaningful that the meaning matters more, and that having achieved fame and fortune and success doesn't necessarily give you the happiness or the well-being that you want. And I actually heard many years ago Michael Trail, who was at, I believe, Macquarie Bank for many years, and then he shifted into Social Ventures Australia. And he said at the time, he wished he didn't have to go through that journey to discover that it wasn't all that money and success was going to not give him the happiness that he thought. Yeah. But I think he also reflected on this at the time, that perhaps that's just part of the journey. Yeah. We have to go through that, and then we go, actually, I'm glad and from my perspective, I've had an incredible journey. I'm so grateful. It's such a privilege. But now I want to breathe. I want more space. I still have financial responsibilities at this stage in my life, but I want to focus more on the things that really do matter to me. Yes, making a difference in the world matters to me, but I want to create more space for my family and my partner. And that's what we see happening as we move into this stage.
And it's interesting the language you use, and you've just done it, and we all do it, is I used to do this, I used to, now I want to do something more meaningful.
Yes.
But of course, at that time, that was very, very meaningful.
It was incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, so achieving, your career, getting your mortgage paid,
yes.
getting promoted at work, taking care of your children,
That's
all those
right.
normal things are very, very important at that phase of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And simultaneously, I realised relatively early on that it was a calling for me, and particularly my work in education, which I don't do a lot of now. I tend to coach principals if I'm going to do any work in education or their teams. But a few times I tried to step out of it because most of my work and financial, benefits were coming from the corporate sector. But every time I tried to pull out of it, Pod, and even today, I keep getting pulled back into it. Yeah. And I've learned to trust that and think, okay, this is what I'm meant to be. Maybe this is what I'm meant to be doing, you know.
Yeah. It's funny you say about that, the person from Macquarie Bank who went to Social Ventures Australia. I was on a podcast yesterday where I was being interviewed. Right. And the person said to me at the very end, which I wasn't expecting, said, if you could coach anybody in the whole world, who would it be? Right?
It's interesting.
And, but my response came out of my mouth without me even thinking about it. And my response went like this: you know what? I wish I had the opportunity to coach the younger version of me to help me come through some of those transitions faster. But then I said, but you know what? I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't done that.
That's
so
right.
It's probably a waste of time.
It is.
And when I think about that, and I think about the word achievement with Marty Seligman, it's important, I think, at 30, 40, maybe in our 50s, that we do focus on that.
Yes.
But just recognize as we get older, we get meaning elsewhere. It doesn't have to come from achievement. It can come from other things.
That's right. And particularly for men, I think, because so much of their identity has been on achieving, and primarily as providers, because often I've worked with a lot of men in my life, which I see as an absolute privilege, because they'll often say to me, what I'm sharing with you, Suzy, I haven't shared with anybody, not even my wife. So it's an absolute privilege to do that and for them to open up and talk about that. But yeah, I guess there's been a lot of their identity has been on achievement, and it is really challenging to transition out of a traditional career role into, and I know we were talking about the first and second half of life. I actually like the concept of the 3 acts, and Jane Fonda, who's one of my, wonderful icons, I guess, but she talks about the 3rd act, and I've recently moved into my 3rd act right now. Wow. And I think it's an opportunity if we approach it, hopefully and intentionally, to really think again about what matters most and how do I want to live my life for this final 3rd act.
Can I grab your attention for a second? I hope you're enjoying the conversation. We're a new podcast and we're growing pretty fast, so thank you everybody for listening and watching. Can I ask you to subscribe or press like on whatever platform you're listening or watching this to, because that helps us to keep growing, and then it helps us to give us shows like this. Back to the episode. I'm going to jump on that word matters.
Yeah.
That's a really important word. A guy called Gordon Flett from York University, who I'm sure you're aware of, he does a whole lot of stuff around the notion of psychological mattering.
Yes.
There's who do I matter? Where does my significance come from? Where am I deemed to be important, and therefore I matter to that person or that job, etc. And so when you think about that from a man's perspective, and you quite rightly said this, a lot of the mattering comes from my work, my status, my mates in around the water cooler on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon. But then he talks about the idea of anti-mattering, is in terms of, when do I become invisible? When am I no longer the main person in the room, or the person who can go through the spreadsheets on the screen and give every piece of data, but now my eyesight's deteriorating, I can't even see the screen. All of those things. And that transition can be quite difficult, even when you're still in the workplace.
Absolutely.
What do you see around that, and how do you help people to think about that?
Yeah, and I think I hadn't heard that term anti-mattering, and in fact, Marty Seligman has more recently incorporated some of that mattering research. So even in PERMA with the M, and I think he's got another model, PRISM now, he's incorporating more of this mattering alongside meaning, which I think is interesting. I think first and foremost, because I'm a proactive coaching psychologist, from a well-being perspective, my advice and recommendations would be to be proactive about this. And in fact, I have had the opportunity, as you may have had to work with senior professionals where the organisation has supported them in the transition out of the organisation, which I think is such a wonderful opportunity. And in many cases to ensure that they have, if they desire to, have a sort of create an alumni and still be able to have some, wise contribution back. So if you can more proactively and prepare for that transition, the better you're going to do psychologically. But historically, we would have seen where you make the big plan for the big global world trip, and not a lot of thought, maybe I'm going to play more golf or some general statements like that, but not a lot of intentionality or planning around that. Often there'll have been meetings with the financial planner, and I honestly believe good or great financial planning done well really is life design. And I think there's huge opportunities that coaching and coaching psychology can offer financial planners too, and perhaps even tap in to people that wouldn't have gone out and sought out coaching. But if a financial planner can take a coaching approach, it could actually benefit them. So I think first and foremost, be proactive, be intentional about it. Do a little bit of forecasting, and you've mentioned hope and hope theory. We have a theory about hope, which is a very practical theory, really, about looking at our goals or our objectives for what we want, how we want our life to be going forward, but starting to look at the potential pathways. So sitting with a coach, basically coaching is a hope enhancement intervention, and I've done 2 randomised controlled trials to prove that, Pod. But sitting there working through those potential pathways and then weighing up against our values, like how does that fit with my core values? And for some people, it's the first time in their life they've actually stopped to think about what matters most to me, and then also thinking about my strengths. And so how might I be able to use my strengths in ways that I was using it in the workplace, but now there might be an opportunity to use those in a different way. So I think the more intentional and proactive you can be, the better. But I also, if I could take a breath for a moment and introduce one other model that I know you're familiar with, which is William Bridges' transition model, which we were taught at Sydney Uni. It's a very simple and practical model, and I always quote Kurt Lewin, there's nothing as practical as a good theory, and I use theories a lot in my coaching. And so we know that when we're going through transitions, there's an ending, there's a neutral zone, and then there's a new beginning. And often people will come out of an ending and they'll rush straight into a new beginning because they don't want to sit with the discomfort that often accompanies the neutral zone or the anxiety of, oh my God, what am I going to do?
A lot of people call the messy middle, because it's
right.
messy.
It is.
The neutral sounds like it's fine. It often isn't. It's often really, really uncomfortable.
I like that reframe. And it can be, hence why people rush into things. They think, oh, I'll do this or I'll sign up for this without really giving themselves the time and space. And I know it's not always affordable or people aren't always ready for a coaching scenario or coaching engagement. The benefit of it, again, this, Pod, is that you have someone objective sitting with you that can help you sit in that. Because I often say to my clients, I don't mind sitting with you in the messy middle, if you like, but I certainly don't like it for myself. But it's so wonderful to sit with other people in that space. Yeah. So you can really take a breath, look at those potential pathways, align them against your values and your strengths, and then feel like you're making the best possible decisions moving forward. And of course, I think it's really important to acknowledge, and this is something I've learned after having done this with individuals for decades and decades, is that we need to think about who's in our family, who's in our ecosystem. So it's often the planning is also not purely what I want for myself, but how does this fit with what my partner and I want or what we want for our family, So I think they're really important and often deep conversations to have. And if you're not used to having those, which a lot of men aren't, to have somebody be able to sit with you and have them is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I spoke to someone recently who has come out the other side, so has gone through the messy middle, is on the other side. But I asked him, what's been the most surprising thing you're now doing that kind of came out of your skills in corporate life? And this guy was a very senior exec in the financial planning business. And he said, I'm teaching ethics to kindergarten children.
Love it. I love
I said, seriously? He said, yeah. So every Tuesday morning, it's a primary school, and I got kindies, I got it for year 1, I got year 2, and they don't know the word ethics, but we're talking about decision making and stuff. He said, that's what I used to do in my corporate life. And that's it. And he loves it. He says, it's the highlight of his week.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Can I jump to two different topics or related topics? I want to talk about adversity and the notion of how we grow after a traumatic event, because there's a lot of stuff there. And you mentioned I grew here and here, so I want to talk about that. And I want to come to flourishing, because I know you've done a whole lot of stuff over there as well. And there's a bridge from one to the other. Our audience is between 35 and 60.
Right.
And so that age of life, stuff happens.
A lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff happens. Life comes along and smacks you in the face where you weren't expecting it again and again and again. And for some of us, that can be pretty hard slap. And some people, and other people seem to take it on board differently and work with it.
Yes.
And the second half or the third act of life is often a reflection of how well we've dealt with those different events. But there is a lot of research in your area around that paradoxically, the way we react to one of those events can actually help us to be a far happier, better person later.
Exactly.
Can you talk to that? And for someone listening who's going through a tough time right now, what might they think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, as a clinical psychologist, we know a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and, I was trained in helping people resolve that. But I was really surprised when I came across the research by Tedeschi and Calhoun around post-traumatic growth. And that resonated with me because I went through a divorce in my early 30s. My 20s was particularly challenging, not just my relationship, but in terms of going to university as someone that left school when they were 16. So there were a lot of stressors. I had a lot of anxiety. I have a family history of anxiety. I think, though, for me, it really became post-traumatic growth. It was painful. I'm going to tell you, it was painful. But I remember sitting in with a mentor of mine when I first started as a psychologist, and she basically headhunted me and said, will you come and work with me, come and sit in and observe what I do. So a very accomplished, late stage career psychologist. And I sat there for 2 weeks. And often she would say, this is really horrendous what you're going through now. And honestly, I heard some of the most horrendous stories in those 2 weeks of people that had lost children, like horrendous scenarios. And she said, but at some point, you will be able to look back and see the gems or the pearls. I know that's hard to believe now, but she always used to say, there's no science to this, but you'll come across people in your life that are going through a similar scenario, and you'll be able to relate to them and you'll be able to help them as well. So I think there are many. I want to firstly say it doesn't come down to the sole individual factors of whether we develop PTSD or whether we develop post-traumatic growth. There are so many contextual, environmental factors. So I think that's really important, because I think one of the critiques, and certainly something that I've come to be very acutely aware of, because my training was very individually focused as a clinician. We didn't talk a lot unless you were doing sort of family systems, where there was a lot of more focus on systems theory at family level. But in my training as a clinical psych, we just focused on the individual and looking at what was wrong with them internally. We didn't pay a lot of attention to the environment they were in, and that was a learning through my whole career of, oh my goodness, I can help you improve your well-being, but if I send you back into the environment, the workplace environment you're in, or even the family environment, you're not going to flourish, So I think, yes, there are things we can do at an individual level when we're going through these, and I know in developmental psychology they talk about heat experiences. There are things we can do that can predict or help us move more towards PTG, post-traumatic growth, than PTSD. But again, I think there's a lot of proactivity to prepare ourselves. We can never fully prepare ourselves. I mean, I lost my parents at 96. Both of them lived to 96. They both passed away in the last 3 years. I'd never seen a therapist in my life, which is ridiculous for a clinical psychologist. I mean, I've got a pretty robust mood, I have in my life, but when they turned 90, I thought, this is going to be tough. I could see it coming. And so I started therapy when they turned 90, and it still didn't prepare me for the loss of my parents, So I do think you can. There's things you can do to prepare yourself, but I also think we need to accept that it's still going to be tough, Yeah. But I think they are factors that can potentially lead to PTG. But as I said, there's many variables in our environment around particularly social support, our relationships, what groups, what community we have around us. So there are a lot of variables there that can affect that.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I just want to let you know we have some amazing guests coming up over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss them. We have the mindset coach for one of the top sporting teams in the world to share with us how athletes, and then us, can manage our own capacity to make sure we're optimizing ourselves. We have an amazing conversation that everybody in midlife will go through, and that is a conversation with their parents who are coming to the end of their life and how to have it. We also have a global expert on imposter syndrome. 3 amazing conversations, 3 amazing episodes. Make sure you subscribe so you get full access to those. Now, let's go back to this one. So there's 3 things there that I think that we can underline there. If I am going through a tough time, and of course I will at some stage.
Yes.
Or I could even preempt it like you did in terms of my parents in their 90s, they will pass. I want to get ready for myself for that.
Yes.
The first step is knowing that this too shall pass.
Yes.
As then, like your supervisor said to you, you will see the gems down in the future.
Yes.
You just don't know that now.
That's right.
You will see them there. So this moment will pass, whereas often we're stuck in it going, the clouds above my head and it's pouring on me and nobody else. And yes, but it will pass. I think the second thing you said is you could preempt some stuff and put in a support system ahead of time.
Yes.
And I find the people who are proactive in many aspects of life are also proactive there. Like, I'm not surprised that you did that because you're generally proactive anyway.
Yes, that's right.
And I've seen many successful people preempt, hey, I'm about to move into a bigger role, or my family and I are going through a tough time next year. Who do I set up as a person to talk to to help me think through that? Yeah.
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to be a coach. It can be a mate. It could be a friend. It could be a buddy.
Well, I think, again, if we come back to the gender differences, females have historically and probably evolutionary, we've sat around the fire and we've built our relation and we've helped each other. And in fact, some wonderful work by Shelley Gable, who I mentioned before, who's looked at our responses to stressors. And, we know a lot about the fight or flight response, but she's found, particularly for women, that we move into what's called tend and befriend. So we tend to move in, whereas perhaps a man might deal with it differently. But we are seeing things change, from my dad's day where it was, go to the pub and have a beer with your mates. And that's not to say that they didn't talk about things, and I don't know because it was men's business and my dad didn't share that with me. Yeah. But we are seeing, with the younger generation, particularly through, there's clearly a lot of things that are wrong with social media, but I'm also seeing a lot of openness to learning and also particularly younger women really having expectations of their partners to be open to grow and develop. Yeah. And what I've also seen, particularly for young men, is they might not have had a role model necessarily. They may or may not have, but they're doing it for their kids. And in fact, I've had a lot of people that have come to me in my career that have said, I want to be the change I don't want to pass this on intergenerationally. Yeah. I want to do something different this time in my role, particularly as a parent.
And to your earlier point, it's extraordinarily difficult to do by yourself. Mm-hmm. You need a counterfoil to help you think through what you're doing, or like your experience of helping someone by doing the strengths test, they got to go, oh, I am good at this. I didn't really know I was good at this, and therefore I can do something.
Yeah.
Lean into somebody else is your core message here.
Yeah, but like you said, Pod, wonderful if you can engage with a coach. And I'm going to say it is such a great investment if you can access that. But like you said, very hard to do yourself, and it takes a lot of self-regulation to do that. And we know when it comes to character strengths that self-regulation is the most commonly occurring bottom strength of people, which correlates with what we know about New Year's resolutions. Like we all have good intentions, but it doesn't actually enact into meaningful changes. So if you can find someone that acts as a bit of a buddy, like you said, it might even be that you catch up with your mate at the, wherever it is that you for a coffee. I've got a couple of friends now, male friends, that have just recently moved into semi-retirement, and they are intentionally and actively catching up with their mates and talking about their lives and their retired lives. And that's such a huge shift, because if I think about my dad, he really lost touch with a lot of his male friends, and Mum became which she always was, his best friend, I guess. But and we have seen a lot of males lose touch with those relationships, and it's so important to continue to build those relationships, not just for you, but for the relationship, because often the female partners can feel a lot of additional pressure if you're the primary person.
Well, if you are the spouse, you are the caregiver, you're the emotional support, you are the social organizer.
That's right.
In many senses, you're the cook and cleaner.
Exactly.
That can be exhausting.
Absolutely.
We had David Poynton from the Men's Table on here recently, and they basically have a structure whereby you sign up to have a meal every month with 11 other men.
I love
and it's in a quiet room, so it's in like a private room in a restaurant or above a pub, etc. And some people continue for up to 7 or 8 years. But the premise is we're here to have proper conversations, not just tell me about your maintenance project you're doing at home. It's actually a real conversation.
Wow.
The ripple effect of that the research they've done, feedback from the wives, spouses, partners, daughters of some of those men is they're happier.
Love it.
They've one of the things that David said was men often say to us, my emotional literacy was black and white. Now I've got a rainbow.
I love that.
Yeah. Someone who's dressed in pink would love that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But the ripple effect is my man is happier, able to talk, less angry. In the case of some men, less aggressive.
Yes.
Or not aggressive at all.
Yep.
And it's purely because they have found a place to have a conversation and just to let...
Express it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're absolutely right. Women are really, really good and always have been very good at finding another woman to talk to.
That's right.
But I think what we're discovering is men tend to do it in groups rather than one-on-one.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's a better way.
It can be quite, as you know, confronting. And I draw parallels to teenagers, particularly I have, my son's 30 now, but as a teenage boy, my daughter was like always wanting to have, conversations and continue to do that. But with Sid, the best place was driving to school in the morning, the side-by-side conversations. And I would even suggest now that they are possibly a better way, rather than it being too face-to-face, knee-to-knee, can be very full-on. But the side-by-side conversations are a lot easier.
It's a guy called Tim Hewson who runs Mongrels of Men, which is a great organization. But his phrase is walk side by side with a man and he'll tell you anything you want to ask him. And that's the idea of how do we walk side by side.
Exactly.
Yeah. You talk about mood, meaning how we feel. You talk about mindset. You talk about motivation in terms of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Talk about might.
Yes.
What's might?
Oh, well, might is the strength. So
as in using your strengths.
Using your strengths. So I was trying to come up with this model, and then I couldn't make it fit. So I had to use my strength of creativity. And so I thought, right, might will do. So magically, the 6, they all start with M.
But the idea here is if we're able to do stuff that we like doing, that we're good at.
Yes.
If our mindset is around the notion of not every day is a great day, but I can find the moments that are good.
That's right.
And know that not every moment is good, but I know the parts that I am doing.
Exactly.
I'm aware of myself.
Yes.
That's the mindfulness part. I'm trying to do stuff that excites me and interests me. So there's a motivation piece. Like
yeah.
all that together is saying
Yes.
you're going to be in a better place. You're going to be good for you. You're functioning better. You're physically better. You just enjoy your life.
Absolutely. And so the model that I created, called the 6M model, was based on 6 key psychological capabilities that there's significant evidence base for. I've actually just had someone providing a literature review to firm that up for us as part of the model development. But they are 6 key psychological capabilities that I learnt as a clinical psych to help people manage mental ill health. But those same 6 psychological capabilities which you've just articulated, I've also used extensively in my executive coaching. So they can be used for reduction of mental ill health. They can be used for promotion of psychological well-being. Like, for example, we're on our developmental journeys. We all are, right? I think that they are tools that you would want. And I know you're hoping to walk the Camino. I walked part of the Camino last year. They are tools on our developmental journey. They may not bring us to complete self-actualization or self-transcendence or a unitive state of adult development, but there's certainly tools that you'd want on the journey. And historically, you wouldn't have learnt those psychological capabilities until you'd been to see a clinical psych. If you'd been suffering with depression, anxiety, you'd had something stressful, in your life, or if you were fortunate enough to be an elite athlete, you had a great sports coach, sports psychologist, or if you had the privilege of working with a senior executive coach like yourself that was familiar with these capabilities and integrated them into your exec coaching model. But if you think about that's, if we look at the bell curve, they are the outliers, right? The majority of people in our community still haven't learnt basic psychological capabilities. And so that's what I've been really passionate about, is teaching them in schools where children are learning them now. Not all schools, but it's getting there. And then in workplaces, where, again, many people might not have been to see a psychologist, for example, but they've got access to learn these skills that they can use at work and in their whole lives.
So if I'm one of the people listening to this and I haven't been to that school or I haven't been to that workplace, just give me 2 examples of just 2 practices that you find. And I know you'll have discussed this many times in the past, because for me, gratitude is the big one for me.
Yes.
But what are 2 practices that you find that for someone who's never been exposed to this before, do this as a daily or a weekly or a monthly practice, and you will find great benefit from it?
Absolutely. And there are many practices. In my book, The Positivity Prescription, I outline 20 different positivity practices. And we do have a free diary card that's available on our website for anyone that wants to download.
We'll link to that.
Yeah, so you can actually look at your weekly schedule and look at the 20 interventions and then be intentional about what's called prioritising positivity. So there's some research on that. We know that there are individual differences in how much people do it. I'm an outlier. I love prioritising positivity because I like those little mood boosts. So you can definitely prioritise positivity. But 2 was gratitude and mindfulness or meditation more broadly. So gratitude's an interesting one because firstly, it is probably the most researched construct in positive psychology. We're now getting to know a lot more about the nuance. It doesn't work for everybody. For some people, there's a sense of guilt, there's some backfire that happens to it. So I just want to, again, we talk a lot about this concept of the person-activity fit. So there needs to be a fit between the person and the activity. But in saying that, Pod, what I was going to say is often immediately people go, oh, no, that's not for me. Oh, I'm not going to fill out one of those gratitude journals, And I would just question that and encourage somebody who's looking at this for the first time to ask themselves, am I willing to experiment? Because in my experience, you might be pleasantly surprised at the impacts of it. And it's how it's done. So you might not go and buy a gratitude journal from Kiki K or wherever you get your gratitude journals from. It might just be, as one of my clients shared with me, that she spoke to her husband about it. She said that she was going to embark on just identifying 3 things at the end of the day, and she'd read the research, knew that it had been shown to have a positive impact on mood. And she said, would we be able to do this together before we go to bed? The last thing we do is to just share our 3 things for the day.
And 3 things that we're grateful for.
Yes,
Yeah.
and perhaps it went well during the day. So it reorientates your brain. We have a negativity bias that we're constantly working with. It reorientates your brain onto things that went well, because the beauty of having worked clinically for years is I've worked with people that have had horrendous things, but even people that have horrendous things can find little glimmers,
Yeah.
like sitting having a cup of tea in the sun for a minute or two. Yeah. So when it comes to gratitude, it's important to think about how it's going to be done. Mm-hmm. Another quick example I'll give is a lady that was on that panel I mentioned about how positive psychology changed my life. And she said that her husband had been diagnosed with clinical depression. And so she'd been doing a lot of research, came across PosPsych, and she said to him, look, I'm just wondering whether we can, at the dinner table, do a gratitude with the kids. And the kids were, I think, tweens, sort of early adolescence. They were still quite open, because sometimes teens start to get, roll their eyes when it comes to some of this stuff.
Between 15 and 22.
You got to get them when they're young, right? But anyway, and at first he said, I can't do this. Like, I can barely see why I want to live. Like, how am I going to find things that I'm grateful for? Yeah. And she said, yeah, I get it, but how would you feel if we started it? And he said, okay, I'll try, right? And she said the first week or two it was really hard going, and he might not have said anything. He just observed, or he'd try, little things. But she said what happened was, as the kids in particular who really got into it and started sharing what they were grateful for, it gave him a whole new perspective on life. And I'll get goosebumps talking about it. And she said that it shifted his mood, because he started to see life through the lens of his kids, and it had a positive impact on his depression and lifted his mood. Yeah. So it is powerful. It just depends how you do it. Yeah. The second thing I mentioned is mindfulness. Now, when it comes to mindfulness, there's everyday mindfulness, which is basically just learning to be as present as we can in the interactions that we have. And I always use the 3 questions, which comes out originally a Tolstoy book, but there's a beautiful children's book called The 3 Questions. What's the most important time? And that time is now, because that's all we really have, is this moment to the next moment. Who's the most important person? No, it's not you. It's the person in front of you right now. And the 3rd question is, and what's the most important thing to do? And that is to be present with that person, not multitasking on your phone. So really trying to, again, there's intentionality around this about when I have an interaction with someone, even if it's the barista, a brief interaction, but probably more importantly with the people that really matter in my life, put your phone down, or be really intentional about, if I can't give my full attention now, say, can we regroup later, like I'm in the middle of something. So there's the everyday mindfulness, being present as much as you can, noticing things in our environment, bringing an appreciative eye to so much beauty that we have in our world. But then there's mindfulness practice, which for me is much like going to the gym. Mm-hmm. So I go to the gym 2 to 3 times a week. I'm lifting weights, building up my biceps so I can carry weights, heavy things as I age. But mindfulness training is the same. Basically, regardless of what practice you do, and there are many apps available, the basic exercise is using an anchor, which is often your breath. It could be a mantra. When your mind wanders, which it will, we notice it, we bring it back. It wanders, we notice it, we bring it back. That's just like lifting a muscle at the gym. So we're building up our attentional control at a very basic level, which is important for our capacity to be resilient. There's a whole lot to that I could go into, but it really does build up our capacity then for everyday mindfulness. So when we've been practicing it, we can more easily use that in everyday practice. And I mentioned the students when we were doing it as an activity, and often the students picked it because they thought, oh, this will be quick and this will be easy. And what they discovered was that it was neither. In fact, it was not that easy, as most people discover, which is why they often give up. And so I would encourage people, find something again, person activity fit, find a 10-minute, a 5-minute, whatever's going to work for you. But through the semester, when the students were doing that activity, they had to write a reflective piece, as you know, Pod. And more often than not, the students will often say, well, I didn't really feel like it was doing anything. But about halfway through the semester, my family or my friends would say to me, what's happened to you? Or are you on a new medication or something, because other people started to notice how you were turning up.
Yeah.
So try not to write it off. Yes, it has originally, a lot of it's come out of Buddhist philosophy and psychology, but also prayer can be a form of mindfulness. So it doesn't have to have a religious association. It can be at its very basic level brain training, if you like, or attention training. And there are many different apps, as I said, that you can learn how to build your mindfulness muscle.
Can I just pause this conversation for a second? A lot of our listeners tell me they really love the episode and they get a lot of value from it. They're just not quite sure what to do with it. So what I have done is record a 10-minute episode. It goes out a couple of days later with a couple of key actions that will absolutely work, and the research behind them to tell you why they'll work. All you got to do is execute. Can't be simpler than that. So have a listen to the episode. It comes out a couple of days later, and let us know which ones you're doing and how they're working for you. Back to the conversation. I love those, and I fully agree with you. I have practiced those for a long time myself.
Have you? Yes.
And I've also, if I can use the right word, prescribed those to other people for a long time. The gratitude one, I find that men's natural initial response is, that sounds a bit strange. It sounds really strange to do this.
Yes.
And then
a
few weeks later or 3 months later, they come back to me and go, I'm a lot calmer than I used to be.
Exactly.
My wife tells me that.
Exactly.
She says I compliment her a lot more than I used to.
Yeah.
She likes that.
Absolutely.
And even the days that are, and I had one gentleman said to me, and he went through a horrible time with a child who was severely ill. He said, even in those darkest moments, I found things to be grateful for, such as the care by the intensive care nurses.
Wow.
And I was just watching for that, as opposed to being stuck into how precarious situation that I currently am in. Now, it didn't change the situation.
No, exactly.
It just changed what he's focusing on.
Absolutely.
And that's quite extraordinary. The mindfulness piece, I heard the Dalai Lama say this once. He said he was teaching. Somebody said, it's easy for you, you're the Dalai Lama. And he said to this person in the audience, he said, when you try mindfulness, where did your mind wander? He goes, to Burger King.
I love that.
And the Dalai Lama says, so do I. Every time. But the difference is I bring my mind back.
That's right.
So that's the only difference.
Exactly.
Not that you got distracted, of course you will, but bring your mind back to what you're trying to do.
And it is a skill, and I've tried pretty much every app available on the market. And a couple that I've done that there's been a 30-day challenge, because often they'll have a 10-day. But what I found that was by about, if I could keep it up particularly consecutively, by about day 22 to 25, that's when I really started to notice the difference. And then that reinforcement has led me to continue. So I have a daily practice. I'm not a huge meditator, but every day I'll do at least 10 minutes meditation. And it's also an opportunity, and there are various formats of it, to just, as John Kabat-Zinn, when I heard him speak years ago, to drop into yourself rather than just waking up, an alarm blaring, jumping out of bed or whatever, to just take a moment to check in. How am I feeling? What thoughts are populating my head? What's my intention for the day? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? So there's so much. And there's also, there's opportunities for it to be transcendental, if you like, or transcendent. There's an opportunity for us to connect, whether it's with God or whatever your beliefs are. So yes, at its very basic level, it can be a skill that builds attention, but it can be so much more than that.
We will link to your book and to your website for people who want to get more practices. So I could talk to you for days and hours and weeks, and we could go forever, and we can't. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that's really useful for our listeners to know?
I think we've covered a lot of ground, really, but I think, there is a lot here to know. And I think, as I said to start with, I just really wanted to whet people's appetite to perhaps do a little bit of reading. There's MOOCs available, massive open online courses, free, that you can do from major universities. And positive psychology was originally taught at Harvard, spread to Yale, it spread to most of the major universities have courses that you can access and do for free, which is amazing. But I think, we always start with what's working well in positive psychology. So start from a place of reflecting. And as you read it, you'll probably think, I've been doing that, so really acknowledge what you have been doing well and then look for opportunities. Don't try to do everything at once. Just experiment and play with some of particularly the interventions or the practices, and then, regroup and then, experiment again.
Yeah. Yeah. One last question for you. I know you're someone who's hyper-reflective and try different things.
Yes.
What is the 75-year-old version of you asking of you or pulling you towards?
This is a really interesting question, Pod, because I have been a huge fan of an activity, as you very well know, called the Letter from the Future, which our mentor, Tony Grant, the founding father of coaching psychology, utilised a lot in his coaching approaches. And I wrote my first one from when I was 35. And I think I wrote it from my 40-year-old self, which really wasn't a lot of time. And I had big dreams as a 35-year-old. So I extended that out and adapted it a bit to my 50-year-old self. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote from my 60-year-old self. Now, I just turned 60 last year. And for the very first time in my life, I turned 60 in August, I'm not ready to write it yet. And I found that really interesting. And I think it's part of my developmental shift, because I'm moving out of such a strong achievement orientation to being very, very reflective about how I want to live my third act. And so I'm sitting with a lot of the discomfort at the moment. And also, I mentioned I came out of a divorce I may have early in my 30s. I've had a partner for about 15 years, but we both had very different life goals, and it's worked quite well at the relationship, but we're sort of navigating now what's both of our lives going to look going forward. So it's now becoming more, broader than just me and what I want. And so I'm considering what we both want, and also for my family, and I have grandchildren. So there's a lot more to consider now. So, I think my 75-year-old self would say that you took the time. You didn't rush into a new beginning, as I was saying before. You took the time to sit with the uncertainty, and I will say I am continuing therapeutic work and also supervision and coaching for myself, because I'm a firm believer if you're going to teach your stuff, you need to invest in your own development. So the 75-year-old self would say you definitely took the time to do that. You transitioned out of a very strong achievement orientation with your business, which has gone way beyond what I would ever have thought from someone that left school at 16. And you, which is my intention right now, you continue to make a difference. I, at the moment, retain about 8 or 9 senior executive coaching clients that have major influence in their workplaces for the people in their care. So you continued to do that work, but you created space to consider what else was meaningful, but particularly time, precious time with my grandchildren, who I know as a parent how quickly that time goes, and with my children and with my partner. So really broadening out my life over the next 10 to 15 years.
And that includes trips to Ireland.
Next trip is to Ireland.
How good is that?
Exactly.
Suzy Green, Dr. Suzy Green, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, as always, having you here.
Thank you so much, Pod, for the work you do. This is such important work, and I hope people have really benefited from our conversation today.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe or like on any platform that you're watching and listening to. It means a lot to us. And if you have any comments, please drop them into the comment section. Of course, share this episode with your friends. We know they love that. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.